What's up, YouTube? What's up, everybody? How we doing out there? See, we got a couple people on already today. How you doing? Um, Grateful to have you joining with me right here as I get started. If you want to go ahead, say hi in the chat box. Should see over to the right side of your screen. We got a chat box here. We also got some people jumping in on Podbean. What's up, everybody over there? Hello, how you doing? So, welcome back to the show, everybody. Excited to jump in with everybody this morning. So, as I was just saying, as you get joined in here, we do have the chat box off here to the right side of the screen. If you just want to drop a note in and say hey, and I'd love to just get connected to whoever's joining in and say hello to you. And thanks for being on with me today. I'm excited about today's episode. We're going to talk about why we rush into relationships and yeah, just kind of what's going on for us, what societally and personally, what's happening for us that causes us to rush into relationships, and also how do we heal that, right? How is it that what do we do to really heal whatever's going on within us that's causing us to consistently rush into relationships time and time and time again, and really be able to go into relationships in a more secure and balanced way, and being able to feel good about ourselves and feel good about the relationship that we're creating. So I'm excited to jump into today's episode. I see we got Leisha who just jumped in on Podbean. Hey Leisha, great to see you today. Thanks for jumping on with me. Always a pleasure to have you on here. All right, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into today's episode. I just want to say hello again to everyone on YouTube, and hello to Leisha over here on Podbean. Got Catherine just jumped in on Podbean. What's up, Catherine? Thanks for being on today. We're just about to get started. I'm just kind of saying hello to everyone as we get welcomed in here. We're talking about why we rush into relationships today. So I'm excited to jump in with everyone. Thanks for being on. Same thing on Podbean as we got on YouTube. We got the chat box. So if anybody, as you're listening along, if you want to comment on something, if you have a question, I might take a couple of questions towards the end. So as we go along here, if anybody wants to drop a question in, and then I can circle back to those a little bit later. So thanks for being on, everyone. And let's jump in. Just take a moment to get ready and dive into today's episode. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Conscious Love Show. Shane Kohler here, and pleasure to be back with you today. Today, I think, is a little bit of a hot topic for so many of us, talking about why do I rush into relationships? And I think, I know I've done it, and I'm sure probably so many of our listeners have done it. Those of you who are live with me today, if you want to drop in the chat, have you ever rushed into a relationship? I'd be interested to know how many, if any of you have rushed into a relationship and what that was like and what happened there. So yeah, would love to get a feel for some of the listener experience as we talk about this in today's episode. But it's something that I think so many of us have done. It's something that is very easy to do, and there are a lot of reasons for that, and we're going to talk about some of those reasons today. But this idea of like rushing into a relationship, it's something that like we almost can't help ourselves, right? When you're getting to know someone, and there's the excitement, the energy, and there's that pull and that drive, the idea of kind of hitting the brakes or slowing it down almost seems foreign or unreasonable. Or, it's like, why would I even want to slow this down? Or why wouldn't I rush into a relationship? And so we'll talk about that a little bit today too, right? Like, why do we? And also some of the reasons, like maybe why would we not want to, or why is it good to not? And how to, right? How to regulate ourselves in a way that allows us to slow our roll a little bit and go into a relationship in the best possible way and from the best possible place. So, in addressing the question why, and I think I just want to start with that, talking about why. And, in looking at the reasons why we might rush into a relationship, I think the number one reason, and let me just say the number one reason I think we do it is because from the time we're very, very young, your ideal relationship, falling in love, meeting that person, riding off into the sunset, right? Like that is kind of set up culturally. And I don't think this is just in the US. Like I think this pervades so many cultures across the world. That's kind of set up as like the ultimate thing in life, right? It's kind of set up as the ultimate reward. It's set up as the ultimate, like, oh, when you meet your person and you fall in love, you're going to be set for life. You're going to be happy forever, right? So there's just a kind of brainwashing that happens from a very, very young age. I think it's in the culture. It's even in, if you had two parents growing up, if you grew up in a household where you had two parents, then everything you saw and experienced from them, not necessarily their fights and their drama and that kind of stuff. Okay, now we got fireworks going off on YouTube. That's a little weird. Not necessarily their fights and their drama, but just in the way they would talk, in the messages they would send you, in the way they were about their ideals and their philosophies around relationship. They were giving that to you, right? Like they were impressing that upon you. They were spilling over the impressions of what they thought love was supposed to be, and they were spilling that over onto you. So that's one part of it. And if you grew up in a household with a single parent, then that single parent, consciously or unconsciously, was probably handing down their ideals of, I wish I had a relationship. If only I had a relationship, then, XYZ would be better. Or, one day we'll find the person, or if only your father or your mother was still around, or whatever, right? So there are these constant impressions that are given to us in so many ways. I mean, really, really just in ways that we can't even really understand, because they're just so ingrained into our culture, so ingrained into our upbringing, so ingrained into every narrative of life we receive. And so I think that's a huge part of this, right? It's just to recognize that really from the beginning, from day one, we are being brought up in a culture that is impressing this idea on us that we should find our person, and when we do, everything's going to be amazing. Then we've also got to look at the wounding that takes place and how we look to a relationship as a heal, or I don't like the way that's worded, as we look to a relationship as a resolution to the wounding, right? As something that's going to resolve the wounding or the pain we've experienced in our life. So there's this combination of, from the time we're very young, culturally and within our family structures, it's set up as like, this is the ultimate thing to aspire to, combined with the deal that we also experience a lot of wounding. And naturally, because as a result of the wounding that we feel, or the wounding that we experience, and the cultural upbringing that we receive, we tend to naturally look to that as a way to resolve the wounding. And so there's this combination of things happening that's very, very subtle, but it's being constantly reinforced in every movie you watch and every song you listen to, with the kids at school, with, like, it's just constantly being reinforced everywhere you go and in everything you do. And so by the time you reach adulthood, if you're like me, or like so many of us, you're probably feeling a combination of exhausted, overwhelmed, stressed out, have some anxiety, have some fear, some stress, and then you're wanting a way to kind of make this better. And you have this lifelong conditioned belief that when you find your person, it's going to be better. And so there's this very natural thing that I think happens for so many of us, to just start seeking that. And when we find that, or when we start touching into that, or when we feel like we're getting our hands on that, and then if you listen to a couple of weeks ago, I did an episode on attraction, and I talked about some of the hormonal things and chemical things that happen in us when we're attracted to someone, or when we're falling in love with someone, right? So if you combine everything I'm talking about today with the hormonal chemical experience of being attracted to and falling in love with someone, it's a big, big trap that is almost impossible not to fall into. And so what happens is you meet someone and you feel all of these amazing things, and it really is amazing. Like, it really is one of the most amazing things you can ever feel in your whole life. And you combine that with the belief system I've been talking about, and the upbringing and the wounding, and you put all of this together, it becomes a recipe for, I'll just say, a recipe for disaster. And why is it a recipe for disaster? Let's just touch on that for a minute. It's a recipe for disaster because 90% of the time, and of course there are always the exceptions, and we always got to acknowledge the exceptions, that there are these people that rush in and somehow they work it out and live happily ever after, right? But 90% of the time when we rush into a relationship, the relationship will crash and burn. And so that's why this whole cocktail of things I'm talking about is really a recipe for disaster. And the biggest problem, I think, is that we've never been educated about any of this, right? Like, our parents didn't really sit us down. I mean, if you were really lucky, maybe you had really aware parents, but most of our parents didn't sit us down and talk to us like, hey, when you start dating, you're going to feel a lot of things for someone. And just because you feel all of these things doesn't mean that it is what it feels like. And it's going to be helpful if you can slow yourself down and really get to know the person. Like, most of our parents didn't counsel us like this. We didn't have teachers that would counsel us in this way, right? Like, if anything, most of our parents were like, go meet someone and get married. What's taking you so long? You're getting old, right? Like, our parents will often add the pressure that pushes us into an unhealthy situation. So we're not really educated about any of what I'm talking about right now. In fact, like, the whole lie, the whole happily ever after lie, that when you meet your person, it's going to be amazing, you're going to live happily ever after. Like, most of the people who are teaching us that lie are the people who could save our lives if they were more conscious, right? So the people who are actually pushing that lie are the ones who would have the responsibility of educating us if they were more conscious. And so I say all this to say that, by the time you reach 18, 21, 25 years old, and you're realistically looking for a long-term relationship, you really don't have a chance. Like, it's already too deep. And so the only way you really learn is if you experience just, getting beat up by this. And eventually you go like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but something isn't working and I got to try something else, right? Like that's one way you learn. Another way you learn is if you stumble onto a podcast like this, and it sets off a light bulb in you and you go like, oh my God, this finally makes sense. I finally understand something that I've never understood before, right? So that could be another way you learn, or reading a book, or working with a coach, or right. Like, there are different ways you can learn, but this is not something we learn just naturally on our own growing up. We are like, life, the way it is in this world and within the cultures we grow up in, life is like kind of setting us up to fail in this respect. And so most of us have to learn the hard way in this respect. So, being that we have this incredible cocktail of, societal conditioning, this whole savior complex that, love is going to be our savior, mixed with the wounding we experience, mixed with the hormonal and chemical things that happen when we fall in love, we meet someone and it causes us to immediately, without question, rush into a relationship with them. And then what often happens is, when this relationship inevitably, and I say inevitably 90% of the time, of course, as I said earlier, there are always the exceptions, right? But when this relationship reaches that inevitable point of where it starts to erode, what most of us say is we go, oh my God, I made a mistake. I chose the wrong relationship. I need to go find someone else. Or we cling tighter to the relationship and try to force it to work. Now, both approaches are really a mistake, right? Both approaches are really a mistake, because when we cling tighter to the relationship, like, we're not having the rational, conscious perspective of, whoa, maybe I should take a step back. right? Maybe I should look at the reasons this relationship is eroding and really ask myself like some serious questions about this relationship. But walking away, being like, oh, I guess this is the wrong thing, and just immediately cutting ties is also kind of the wrong approach, because that's more like a defensive, protective approach that is like you're not exploring whatever that relationship is bringing up inside of you, right? Like that relationship might be bringing up an opportunity to confront yourself in some way, to confront your fear, to confront your wounding, to heal something, to go to a deeper level of intimacy with that person, to have some difficult conversations, to speak your truth. It could be any number of these things. But when you're rushing into a relationship, and and when I say rushing into a relationship, I just want to call it what it is. It's going into a relationship from a dysregulated place. And we'll talk a little bit about that today, right? We'll talk a little bit about what that means to go into a relationship from a dysregulated place. But when you're rushing into a relationship or entering a relationship from that dysregulated place, you're also going to be very likely to either cling to that relationship when it starts to erode or to withdraw from the relationship very quickly. Because what you're seeking in that, the same motivation that causes you to rush in, you're not really seeking long-term conscious love. You're seeking a happily ever after. You're seeking a savior type experience. You're seeking a make my pain go away, heal me, solve my problems kind of thing, right? Make me happy, give my life meaning, give me fulfillment. And so when the relationship starts to erode, you're either going to cling to it tighter as your source of fulfillment, or you're going to say, this isn't working, and you're going to check out. But neither one is the approach that leads to conscious love. And so what I'm getting at here is this whole cocktail of things that leads us to rush into a relationship is not an approach that leads to conscious love. It's a very, I'll call it a primitive approach. It's a wounded approach. It's an unconscious approach. It's an uneducated approach, right? Like we're not really aware of what's happening to us. We're not aware of why it's happening. We're not aware of the conditional forces that are causing what's happening to happen, right? We're very much unconscious to all of this stuff and just being driven by these forces in a primitive way. And that's why in almost all cases, it's going to lead to failure. So when we talk about slowing down, right? Entering a relationship slowly. And I even want to say, like, slowly, it doesn't mean that it needs to take forever. And I like to use my relationship with my wife as an example. Not that we did it right. I think people can do it in all kinds of ways. But I think it's a good example of it wasn't slow, but it also wasn't fast. I mean, we were exclusive in less than 3 months. We were physically sexually active relatively early on in our relationship. We didn't wait an incredible amount of time, but we did wait some amount of time. And when the relationship, I think something, and I credit my wife for this a lot because she was a little bit older than me. She had been beat up in relationships a little bit more than I had. She'd been through the ringer a little bit, and she knew a little bit more about what she wanted and what she didn't want. Whereas I was still a little more naive. I was still a little more maybe likely to just rush in. And I credit her with this in so many ways, because whenever our relationships started to rush to like an unreasonable extent, when things started to be said that maybe weren't really appropriate for where we were in the relationship, or when we started to talk about ideas or get into things that like really weren't appropriate for where we were. And when I want to be more clear about what I mean when I say that. When I say that, what I mean is when we started to talk more about the feelings that we were having versus the reality of our relationship, right? So, oh my God, I've never felt like this before. I want to be with you forever. Like, right. We started to talk about the feelings that we were having. And my wife was really, really great about putting it in context and being like, okay, we're having these feelings. That's great. But we really need to see what these feelings amount to over time. Right. And I've shared this on the podcast before. She would say, like, I want to have a slow burn, right? Like, I don't want to crash and burn. I don't want to rush into this and get ahead of ourselves, but I want this to burn in a way that can be sustainable. And so I say all of this to say that that was a very conscious approach to a relationship, right? Where we're having these feelings, we're having these experiences, it's not that we're above this stuff or it's not happening for us. Like, it is happening for us, but there's a level of awareness about what is happening and why it's happening and where it's coming from, and a level of awareness between the feelings I'm experiencing in the moment that are based on a myriad of things, that are based on chemicals and fantasies and all this stuff. Right. And then there's the reality of the actual relationship that we've built with each other, and being able to not get so swept up in the feelings that we lose touch with the reality of the fact that we've only known each other for 2 months, right? That this thing could realistically go as easily as it has come. Now, I want to touch on the wounding, because I think one of the biggest forces that drives this, like, yes, it's very much driven by the chemical reactions and the hormones and things like that. It is very much driven by that. It is also very much driven by our societal upbringing and our perspectives about love and romance and our fantasies and our dreams. It's very much driven by that. But I think something that kind of locks it in, right? Where if it was just the chemicals and it was just our culture, it wouldn't be as seductive. But something that really locks it in, something that gives it this addictive quality, something that renders us, I think, powerless over this in a lot of ways, is the way in which our wounding interacts with this. And as I was preparing for today's episode, and I was really thinking about, like, what are the causes, that the reasons why we rush into relationships, the first word that came up for me was a trauma bond, right? And a trauma bond is when we forge a bond with someone out of trauma. I know I'm probably being Captain Obvious when I say that, right? But it's when the bond is forged because of trauma. Now, we tend to think of trauma bonds, like, I think when we hear that, or when the way it's usually talked about, like, we tend to think of trauma bonds as like, oh, well, they're with toxic people, or, it's when my trauma is seeking out, like, somebody who's gonna traumatize me. And so then, I seek these bonds with people who are going to reinforce the trauma. And that's all relatively true. I'm not saying that's not true, but I think you can even form a trauma bond with a potentially healthy person, because I don't think a trauma bond is necessarily about who the other person is, but it's about where you are bonding with that person from, right? It's like, when I am seeking a bond with this person, where am I coming from when I seek that bond? Am I coming from, like, a clean, clear, secure place? Or am I coming from a wounded place? And I think what, like, our egos do, like, our egos take things very personally, right? The ego is the part of ourselves. And I've spoken about this in many podcast episodes, but I always like to revisit it sometimes, because it's important to just to be aware that, a lot of our thoughts are egoic thoughts. And that means that they're not coming from a clean and clear place, but they're coming from a place that is a little bit trying to control, trying to manipulate, trying to protect, afraid of what's going to happen, and trying to control circumstances and make sure they work out in a certain way. Right. So like, when you look at the ego, and what the ego does is the ego takes everything personally. The ego kind of keeps an account of all our injustices and all the times we've been let down, or the times people have hurt us, or the ego's kind of like keeping track of all of this, and very much feeling victimized to it, and very much feeling like, I got a raw deal in life. And if only this, or if only that, if only things had gone different, or if only this person had treated me differently, or whatever it is, right? But if only this or that, I could be better off. My life could be better off. And so, because the ego is kind of living in this perpetual victim story and keeping track of these injustices and keeping track of the ways in which it's been hurt or wronged or slighted. It's also like always looking for an opportunity to kind of like settle the score, right? Like level the playing field. And so I want you to just see, like, even as you're listening to this right now, just feel into yourself and see if you can kind of feel the way in which this is happening inside of you. And like, see if you can just feel a part of yourself. And like, this may not be the dominant part of you. This may not be the part of you that is, running the show all the time. But I want you to just see if you can get in touch with this, because this is something we all have. And if you can get in touch with this and you can start to just be present to how and when it shows up in your life, it is going to significantly empower you. So, so this part of you that is kind of keeping track of the wrongs, keeping track of the injustices, keeping track of the slights, and feeling victimized by it. And it's looking for opportunities to level the playing field, to settle the score. And one of the I'd say honestly, probably the biggest way that our ego thinks it can settle the score. And this is very subconscious, but when I really learned about this and I really understood how this was happening, it like blew my mind. The biggest way that the ego thinks it will be able to settle the score is by getting someone to love you, right? By getting that special love, that person who makes you their whole world, that person who you're everything to them. They'll do anything for you. They worship the ground you walk on. They care about you. They soothe your every need, right? Like the ego really believes that it can find this person to love you in this way, to be the answer to all of the pain and all of the wounding and all the suffering you've experienced. And that when that happens, when you find that person, that you will finally settle the score. That you will finally settle the score. And all of that pain from the past and all of the stuff you've been trying to get away from your whole life, like it'll finally be resolved. And I think that idea is one of the most seductive ideas in our entire culture. It's one of the biggest lies that we live out of. And yet I think it is one of the most strongly woven. I think to some degree, we all have that. And even when you consciously recognize it and you can see, like, okay, I see that belief operating in me. I see different ways that that's played out throughout my life. Even when you can clearly see that, you can also, what I want to say is, even when you can clearly see that, it doesn't mean that you never operate from that anymore, right? It doesn't mean that it doesn't still sneak in there and start driving the boat. And so if you can see this in yourself and you can see the ways in which that wound inside of you has wanted to seek out love as a way of healing, I think that is the beginning of undoing all of this. So when you can recognize that thing inside of you that has been driving you towards relationship as some kind of solution, and you can recognize that is really not founded on anything real, that's really a lie, right? It's really just not true. And if you can even recognize, and I think like sometimes we just need some practical experience to run by this. But when you can recognize that time and time again, you go into relationships from that need, from that wounded place, and time again, they don't result the way you want them to. Time and time again, they don't end up being what you thought they would become when you went into them. That's going to be the inspiration and the motivation to try a new approach. Right? That's going to be the impetus that like ignites that fire that makes you want to try a new approach. And now I want to talk a little bit about what that new approach would look like. When you meet someone, when you start, getting involved with them, all of those same things are going to happen. All of those same forces are going to be there, right? Everything we've talked about, the wounding that wants to latch onto someone as a way of healing, the cultural conditioning that tells you this person's going to be your everything, right? The the trauma bonding and everything we've been talking about, right? All of it's going to be there. The chemicals and the hormones, right? All of it's going to be there. And so you're going to be experiencing all of this. And at the same time, there's going to be something inside of you, like a form of self-love that shows up in a way of wanting to preserve my boundaries. If you know what that feels like, I think a lot of you probably know what that feels like, right? Like there's all this momentum and all this push to just fall right into that familiar pattern and just rush right into this relationship and let it take over. But at the same time, there's this self-love inside of you that is taking the form as like a need to preserve a boundary. And what you want to do is connect to that. And I think like some of the best ways to do that, not the most exciting things to do, right? It would be so much more exciting just to go head over heels into that relationship with that person. But some of the best ways to do that, one would be to meditate on your experience, like around your interactions with this person before a date, after a phone call, whenever you're feeling a lot of intense, like energy in your body around the person, or whenever you have a lot of thoughts around the person, like to actually stop and meditate on your experience, to stop and journal on your experience, right? To really write out, okay, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? How is this familiar to things that I've thought and felt in the past? Right? Let me distinguish the thoughts and the feelings I'm having from the reality of the person. This is something I talked about earlier when I talked about dating my wife, right? And the relationship we had in the beginning, where we wanted to distinguish, okay, we're feeling a lot of intensity right now, and we want to distinguish the intensity that we're feeling from the reality that we've only known each other for 2 months, right? So it's the same thing here. It's you want to take time and space to separate what you're experiencing and feeling about the person from the reality of the situation. Okay, I've only known this person 2 weeks or 2 months, or we're still in the early stages of getting to know each other. So you want to start to create space in your life to clarify what's happening for you, to clarify what you're feeling in your heart and in your mind, to recognize that what you're feeling, and I think this is the most important thing, to recognize that what you're feeling is not actually about the person, but it's about the energy that you're bringing to the relationship and kind of dumping on that person, right? Like realistically, you cannot know enough about someone in a couple of months to truly love them. But if you bring wounding to the situation and you want to trauma bond with them, if you feel like they're going to be your way out of suffering, if you're riding this wave of chemical hormones, right? Like that can make you feel like you love the person. But realistically, in a matter of a couple months, everything you know about them might be a lie. And I'm not saying that to like put fear in you but I'm just saying like realistically, that is a possibility. So you can't know enough about them to truly be in love with the person. And that's what you want to recognize. And at the same time, like, I don't think we need to kill the romance. I don't think we need to kill the excitement. I don't think we need to kill the passion. Right? So there can be a way of allowing yourself to enjoy the excitement of, what if this is my person? Right? There's a way to be present in the experience of, I think I may be falling in love with this person, while also taking time to slow your roll a little bit and get your feet on the ground and say, while I may be falling in love with this person, I also recognize that I don't know them that well. And so what I'm describing here is a way of emotionally regulating step by step as you move into the relationship with someone, right? You allow the relationship to activate a heightened emotional reality. And sometimes that feels like euphoria. Sometimes that feels like anxiety, right? But you're allowing this relationship to activate a heightened emotional reality for you, while being very aware that that is happening, right? I think awareness is one of the biggest differences. You can have that happening. Like, I think I want to say this because when that happens to a lot of us, we don't recognize that the relationship is activating a temporary experience inside of us. We think that we've finally found our solution to life and that it's going to last forever. Right. And so awareness is 99% of the game here. If you can feel those things, but be aware that what's happening is the relationship is activating a temporary experience that's based on all the things I've been talking about today, right? It's based on hormones and it's based on euphoria and fantasy and things like that. But it's a temporary thing. And if you can be aware that it's a temporary thing, and you can be aware that it doesn't mean this person is your person, then you can enjoy the experience of getting to know that person while also being present in your experience, while being conscious, while keeping your feet on the ground. And then I think this is like a prerequisite to the next piece that I'm going to talk about, is where you really test the person for quality. It's like quality assurance, right? I know I love using these super sexy terms in relationships, but I think you need to have the first one in place before you're even able to do the second one. If you don't have the first one in place, you will be incapable of doing the second one. Because if you're not regulating your experience, you're going to be too swept up in the experience to realistically check this person for quality assurance. So then you're going to believe everything they say. You're going to be swept up and you're going to be at their mercy. And I think I just want to say this too. One of the biggest problems with being swept up and being at the person's mercy is that this is what I want to say is you're swept up and you're at their mercy. And then even if they are a good person, which if they're not, you're in trouble because you're not going to find out they're not a good person. But even if they are a good person, they're probably not going to want the relationship long-term because they're going to want someone who's not so swept up by them. And I know it's counterintuitive, but like they're actually going to want someone that they feel is like a little more of their own person. So it's actually just a fail, lose situation, no matter which way you look at it. So you regulate your experience in order to be able to test the person for quality assurance. I've never said it that way before, but it's coming out that way today. And so what do I mean by testing the person for quality assurance? And this is, if you look at the general kind of green flags, like what to look for in a relationship, that's what I'm talking about here. Right. And it's really not so complex, right? Like that person is going to make consistent effort with you. They're going to, when you talk about like the future or where this is going, they're going to be open to conversations like that. They're going to be able to have mature adult conversations with you about things like that. And it doesn't mean they're always going to be a full, like, yes, I'm all in, want to go the distance. Like, they may struggle with it at times. They may say, I don't know how I feel, and need time to figure things out, but they're going to be able to give you mature, like, responsible interaction around this. They're going to, even if they express, sometimes not being sure about how they feel, or not, needing some time to figure it out, they're also going to express a sincere interest in you and a sincere interest in the relationship you have together. And they're not only going to say those words, but they're going to back that up with effort, right? So they're going to be saying, hey, when can I see you again? Hey, I had a great time. Their whole thing about, I don't always know how I feel, but I really want to get to know you and find out. That's not just lip service. They're actually taking time out of their lives to get to know you and to find out, right? So there's like these really obvious signs that somebody is interested, and they are consistency. They are time, like just taking time to have a phone call with you, taking time to take you out on a date, right? It's not that fake busy. Like, you know what that fake busy is, right? Fake busy means not interested. Real interest means I give you time. It means I give you consistency. It means I'm open and honest about, like, what the future may or may not hold for us, right? Like, that's, and I mean, largely, like, that's what you're looking for. It's really not more complicated than that. If someone shows up for you and puts the effort in and makes that time, and gives you that consistent effort over time, if we say, like, 3 months have gone by, and over the course of 3 months, they have called consistently and made plans consistently and wanted to see you consistently, and you've had conversations about how you feel and about what you want and about where this is going. And at the 3-month mark, they are still on board. Like, yeah, I still want to see where this is going. Yeah, I really like you. Yeah, I would like to see where we are a year from now. I would really like to consider this as a long-term possibility. Those are all green flags. And so, to put it very, very simply, all you've got to really do is keep your feet on the ground long enough to see if there are enough of those green flags. And I want to give a little bit of a timeline here. Like, I know I mentioned 3 months, and I think 3 months is like a great amount of time to say, like, okay, we're exclusive, and I see that we could have some real potential here. But I don't think at that point you just let yourself go into the relationship completely. I think, when I talk about, like, consciously and intentionally keeping your feet on the ground, I think a good amount of time for that realistically is like a year, right? So if you think about, from the time you meet someone, and this can vary a lot, right? Like, if you meet someone and the relationship tends to pick up very quickly, and there isn't a lot of, like, obstacles in the beginning, or things kind of slowing you down or holding you back, in that sense, you might move forward a little bit faster. But generally speaking, like, if you mentalize yourself that from the time I meet someone, I want to give this a year, and I just want to keep my feet on the ground for a whole year, and really go through, like, all these different phases of relationship with someone, and learn how they are in their life, and learn how I am in my life, right? And of course, we'll experience the romance, and we'll experience all of that. But I'm not gonna rush into any kind of big commitment here, or expecting this relationship to become my lifetime thing. Like, I think a year is very realistic. And I know, like, a lot of you listening right now, like, that might scare you to think of a year. Like, that might seem like so long. But, like, we're talking about how many years are you going to spend with this person? And I understand it may depend on where you are in life, right? Like, but But if you're talking about a relationship that's going to last 20, 30 years, a year really isn't that long in comparison. And so I think like we want to we want to get out of this mentality of thinking that we're going to meet someone and it's just going to immediately take off like electricity and we're just going to be deeply in love within a matter of a few weeks or a few months, and that from that point on it's just going to be like smooth sailing into the sunset, right? Like that is really a a lie that has been sold to us. And when I say it's been sold to us, like I want you to realize the amount, like the billions that have been made on this lie, right? Like it's a big business, this lie. But it's not something that ever really translates. It's not something that ever really translates in real life to healthy, secure love. And even the people where you say like, "Oh, well, there are lots of people that got married a month after they met and lasted long term." And I'm going to say like, sure, that's happened, right? There are also a lot of people that got married a month after they met and got divorced a month later, right? So like it's happened both ways. But this is what I want to say is there are no shortcuts. And so maybe you say those people got lucky. Well, I'll tell you what, maybe they got lucky. Maybe their relationship isn't everything you think it is. That's another possibility. Or maybe their relationship is everything you think it is, but maybe they had to go through some really, really hard shit for it to become what it is. And while they were lucky in the sense that they were able to stick it out and have that work, that's usually not the case. Usually when you don't put the work in, or excuse me, usually when you don't put the work in on the front end to have something that you really feel like is worth fighting for when push comes to shove, it's the easiest thing to let go. Usually the couples who last are the people who really put the work in on the front end so that when push came to shove, they felt like they had something worth fighting for. And it wasn't easy come, easy go. And so this is why I say is like, you really lose nothing by not rushing into a relationship. Because the only thing you really lose is the illusion that something that wasn't going to work out anyway would work out. That's really the only thing you lose. The things that are going to work out are still going to work out. And honestly, they might work out faster and they might work out better because you're approaching it consciously and intentionally rather than just being kind of blinded and caught up in it and figuring it out as you go. And I say this from experience because there were a lot of things in my relationship with my wife that we were just blind to. And fortunately, we were in healing work and we learned and we figured it out as we went. But I think like, oh my God, like if I had known some of this stuff ahead of time, like if I had really understood what was happening in our relationship ahead of time, so that when we got there, I could identify it and go like, oh, this is what's happening. Oh my God, it would have been so much easier than just trying to figure it out once I was in the middle of it. And yes, some of the fights we had would have been way less volatile. Some of the times when we thought we were going to break up, we might have realized that we were actually experiencing something that was very normal and it was okay. And like, it wasn't worth going to those extremes about it. Right. Like so many things. And so you lose nothing and you gain so much. And that's why I want to say, like, when we talk about creating a conscious relationship, what we're talking about is going into it with awareness, right? And being aware of what's happening for you, what's happening for the other person, right? Knowing where you want the relationship to go, navigating every phase of the relationship with intentionality and consciousness, right? Because doing that, and that's an imperfect art, by the way, right? Like you're not going to do that perfectly, but doing it to any degree puts you so far ahead of the game of most people that are just out there completely lost in their relational experiences and just trying to survive them. So I want to wrap it up with that today, and it's like this conversation. I know what I'm talking about is a high level of self-awareness and a high level of emotional like practice in terms of emotional regulation. And I know like some of you may be listening to this and you may feel like, oh, I can definitely do that. But others may be like, oh, I don't even know where to begin with that. And I want to say like it doesn't really matter where you are in the journey because there's always another level, right? Those of you who feel like you're amazing at this, I promise you can get better. And those of you who feel like you're not that good, well, one, you might be better than you think you are. And two, you can only start where you are and practice with what you have and get better as you go. Right. So I just want to encourage everyone to drop the pressure on like, oh, can I do this or can't I do this? And just start going into every single interaction with as much awareness as you possibly can. And, if you don't have a meditation practice, develop one. If you don't journal, start, right? Even if it's 5 minutes a day, like that's okay. That is more than enough. But those are some simple practices that are going to allow you to develop more awareness of your own internal world and your own experience and the things that are happening for you. And as you develop more awareness of your own internal world and the experiences and the things that are happening for you, you will, without any effort at all, in as naturally as it can possibly happen, you will catch yourself in relationships with others. There's a natural translation. The more self-awareness you have, the more awareness you will have in relationship with others. And so I just want to, offer that and encourage that and say that like start where you are right now. Go into every single interaction with as much awareness as you can possibly have and develop more awareness as you go. And, you know, I want to say like you really know that you're ready for a conscious relationship when you're able to go into an experience with someone that you really like and someone you're really attracted to and someone that you want to have a relationship with. But as you engage with that person and as that interaction develops, you're able to prioritize your own mental health, your own state of well-being, your own self-love and self-care, right? You are able to consistently prioritize that over the relationship every step of the way. And so, like, it's not about being perfect, but it's just about getting to the place where when push comes to shove, you will prioritize your own mental health, your own well-being, your own like self-love and self-care above any relationship that comes into your life. And every step you take in terms of awareness is a step in that direction. Last thing I want to say today is if you'd be interested in gauging yourself in terms of your own readiness for a conscious relationship, I've put together a short 10-question quiz that will allow you to find out if you are ready for a conscious relationship or not. So I'm really excited to share this quiz with you. It's something I put together, and the questions are really insightful. And in just a matter of a couple of minutes, you can really get clear on where you are in terms of readiness. And in addition to that, I'm also going to share some information about why you get whatever result you get, whether you are ready, almost ready, or not quite ready yet. I'm going to share some information about why you get the result you get, and also some cool next steps that'll just help you move towards the conscious love that you want to get. So I think this quiz is just going to be an amazing opportunity to get a sense of where you are right now in this moment and then also some information about what might be contributing to where you are, and also some things that are going to help you get to where you want to be. So I'm really excited to share this quiz with you. For those of you live today, you're going to have to wait until the episode releases. So make sure to subscribe to the Conscious Love Show podcast so you get updated about new episodes. And when this episode releases, you will find the link to take the quiz in the podcast description. For those of you who are listening to this podcast, you can find that link in the description below. So if you want to take the quiz, go to the description below wherever you are listening to this podcast, and you can find it right there. And I'll be interested to see what results you get and share some information with you about that. All right. So I want to say in closing, thank you for being with me, everybody, today. It's always a pleasure to be here and connect with you and talk about, something that I am, of course, deeply passionate about is creating healthy, conscious love and just getting the absolute most out of life and love, right? I think that's really what we're all here to do. So thank you for being with me today. It's always a pleasure to be on here and connect, sending love to you in your life and your journey as you navigate this complex world of love and relationships. And I will be back here with you next Tuesday. Big love and blessings to everybody. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. See you next week. Take care and goodbye. All right, pod.